Got it. Yeah. What happens then usually with me is that I get into all the minutiae of it all and analyze it all and sit every night and go through all the statistics of it all. And then my ego part of my brain, the personality part of it that always wants to do more, comes in and says I could do 3 miles tomorrow, I could do 5 miles tomorrow, and then I'm into the pain. Where if I stay in the present moment and just enjoy the walk and don't beat myself up if I can't go every day, but sort of set myself a loose target of 3 times a week, it's more comfortable, and I'm not even setting what days I'm going to go. That's the time where I go when the spirit moves me. During the day, if I've got a half hour free, that is the time if the spirit moves me to go. And I'm really pleased with my progress in that, and not overthinking it and just doing it, which is really nice.
Mm-hmm.
A relief. Nice relief
For sure.
from the angst.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Donna, did you have anything to add to that? Yeah. I mean, I think ultimately that's a sample of the way that you can, I don't want to say you can, just the way that a person can learn to interact with all of their life situations, or the characteristics of their overall life situation. There's all these different things, and what we're talking about with the karma yoga, if that's how we want to call it, or what we want to call it. But the idea is that the karma, in the way that I'm using the word karma, is going through what you were calling ego, and it always will. Like we always have ego. I think it's okay. We can just accept that we have an attachment to some degree to ourselves. If I'm attached to my dog, I have an attachment to myself, because it has to begin, the attachment begins with self to extend to other. The thinking about yourself extends to other. Oneself, not you, thinking about oneself extends to thinking about other people. So, and that leads to the othering, but ultimately I have kind of categorized the information through the lens of perception. Now, when you're going on your walk and you're just doing your practice, your lens of perception is clear. Does that make sense? Maybe I've never really explained what a clear lens and a not clear lens, that is the distinction. So it's not like you've been, figuring something out and you've been working on things and really thinking it through and finally it's clear. No, it's the degree of the pristineness of your practice is the clarity of your lens of perception. So the more degree that I have connection with the now moment, if I'm doing my 4 directions, it's pristine. I'm really connected to the present moment. My lens of perception is more clear. So when something comes up that doesn't feel good, I can feel it right away. When things are feeling really nice, I can feel that right away. When a thought starts to emerge, I can see it right away. And maybe it still occurs. Usually it does, but I see it. So I have the space to create choice around whether I'll follow it or not. So ultimately, Ida, I think what I'm taking this to is that this can actually be the way that we interact with everything, with a clear lens of perception. So I'm going into situations at work. I can think about the desire. I can think about the process of getting to the result, and I can ruminate on the result, all of that removing me from the present moment. My lens of perception is very foggy. It's very, I don't want to use muddy because it's not a good or bad thing. And like the word, what's the word that you used? Virtue. It's just a word that I don't prefer to use to explain what we're doing, but I'm not against the word, it's fine. But this is also virtuous. It's another virtue of the practice. When that lens of perception is clear, you see all of these things coming through and how they feel, but it's without the thought, without focusing on the desire, without focusing on the process, without focusing on, what did I say? The result, the desire, the process. So when that's not there, the karma is clear and you're doing things just for the sake of doing things because you can, because you want to. And then you don't end up doing something, like a 9 to 5 job that you absolutely hate because you're trying to get to this goal that you've been thinking about and focusing on. And so I think everything that we do from the time that we wake up, from the time that we go to bed, it doesn't have to have the heaviness of the desire and the expected result. They exist. I mean, let's not pretend. I'm eating because I desire it. I'm sitting here wearing the things and doing the things because I desire them. So I'm not Buddha. I have desire, and that's cool. I'm not Buddha. I have ego. I know that the ego is there. The trick is to not allow it to become a gross disproportionate attachment, but we're never going to be away from the ego. Your desire is coming from at least partially ego. And that's fine. But I think that's a big win, Ida. I think it's super important. The more that the practice is in place, the more you'll see that this can actually be a lifestyle where desire and expectations there, maybe Shayna and I, we go into the city. The desire is to enjoy ourselves. The desire is maybe to shop, have a certain type of food that's only available downtown. We have a plan. We're going to get on the train. We're going to go there. The desired expectation, well, we want to have a good time. That's why we're doing it. We're not going there because we want to bang our heads up against the wall and hate every second of it. That doesn't make any sense. Nobody does that. Well, actually, some people probably do because they're trying to get to some weird expectation. But then we just go. We just do. Maybe the train's broken down, so we have to take the bus. Fine. Maybe we get there and the place that we wanted to go to is closed. Fine. That's all just adaptation. You're just changing with change. There's nothing we could have done to, well, no, we could have checked online or called them or something, but even that, it doesn't matter. Do you see what I mean? So it takes away that heavy expectation. It takes away all of that burden. And when the lens of perception is really clear, the creativity is for the sake of creation. The things that we're doing is for the sake of what I call the human elements. I want to laugh. I want to enjoy music. These are things that I call the human element. Again, maybe dolphins love jazz. I don't know. But for the most part, I think that some of the things that we're doing with the human mind are more rare. So have no reason to believe that my dog, although I see those videos with they're playing the music and the dog's like bumping its head like it's really into the music. So maybe, I don't know, but these are aspects of the human condition that can be embraced that don't require focus on thought and process and expectation. When someone's really catching the vibe and they're feeling the music and they're moving, they're not thinking about expectation and desires but that's all still probably there. It's just intention and will are overlapping, desire and expectation are overlapping, and that's where that power is. The power of just do and the power of just create. So it's perhaps a small step in a bigger step.
Yes, and it's happening with all aspects of my life at the minute, which is just a great thing to see. But I'm finding it so important not to fill that gap, that space that you're talking about between the instinct or the desire to do something and the gap where you can just go ahead with your desire or fill it with some old nonsense that prevents you from going ahead with the thing that you had planned to do, which was always the case with me. I can notice the space now and notice that I could fill it with something or I could just do. I can notice the distinction of that, and that's where I think the actual point of power, I always love that statement, the point of power is always in the present moment. And to be able to use that now in such a small way every day, and it turns into a big thing over time. That's what I'm finding, these small increments of improvement. See, there's that word improvement. These small increments of things are adding up to a much bigger overall change, behavioral change, which is just lovely to see.
Yeah, I think the more that we talk about behavioral change with this system, we do start to get into the hydrostacy practice, because at a certain point, we don't want to have any judgment of the behavior. So an interesting thing about behavioral change with this practice is that when you notice yourself doing something and you still do it, it is no longer a habitual act, but the momentum behind it was still habitual. And there's a lot of momentum behind habitual acts, if that makes sense. So sometimes your body, you feel the pull towards something, and then you're practicing, so you see it, and it's like, well, this is a desire that I don't find inspiring. And if you choose to do that desire, despite having observed it, it is now a choice. But still, if we're doing our practice, we won't even judge that choice. However, if we're in the hydrostacy practice, then we're going to be really paying attention to how all this interaction feels, first and foremost. So to identify something that's not inspirational, and then to jump in and dive into something that's not inspirational, with this practice won't feel as good, and you'll notice it. And then eventually it starts to become like, well, I keep diving into this habitual thing. I see it, I keep choosing to do it, and it just doesn't feel good. I don't like the result. I don't like the process. I don't like the desire. And eventually, and so this is one aspect that's a little bit more difficult for me to talk about, because there's not a lot of scientific way for me to bridge the gap. So it's really, for me, empirical. It's really about experience, but intention and will builds personal power, assuming that you're not leaking power, and we know what that is. And I can, for anybody, I don't know how many people watch my videos, but I can explain that another time. The feeling of this intention and will, this personal power, builds and builds and builds and builds, assuming that we're not leaking power. If we are leaking power, then it does look a little bit like the wavelength and that snail, 2 steps up, 1 step down, 2 steps up, 3 steps down, and that is what it is. But at a certain point in this practice, especially when we're getting into the hydrostacy, where this practice is becoming preferred, the feeling of doing it is becoming preferred, you'll see the habit, you'll feel the habit, you'll proceed with the habit. It won't feel as good as it used to when you were doing it just completely mindlessly. And over time, that balance starts to tip. And if the personal power necessary is there, the habit can just be dropped in an instant. But the difficult thing about this is I can't quantify personal power. It's a feeling of it's a feeling of confidence, but not that confidence you have to talk yourself into using words. That's something a little bit different. That's not what I mean. And anytime I use the word power, it means attention is attached to it. A dream of power is a dream in which your active attention is attached to it. A vision of power is a vision that you're having with active attention attached to it. A moment with power is a moment where you have your active attention attached to it. So the more that you attach your active attention without all of the judgment and the thoughts and the rabbit holes and all that cognition and hydrostacy, that's really starting to relax anyway. So it's probably still occurring, of course, even for me sometimes. And it's just a redirection process, and that's fine. We'll always be doing that. But like you said, this starts to touch every single aspect of your life experience. The practice does. The more that we're just doing it and we're not getting lost in the rabbit holes of thinking, if the warrior training is in place, then we're not going to leak much power, and the intention and will start to accumulate. We'll notice how it's affecting every single aspect of our life experience, but we're not rushing to get rid of eating ice cream too much. It's fine. But the eating ice cream too much, you're paying attention to it. The lens of perception is clear because you're engaging your practice without judgment. That's a part of mindfulness. If you start judging yourself, you're not mindful. Your second pillar is gone. And so your third pillar definitely can't be there if your second pillar isn't there. So if you're doing your practice, then all three pillars are established. You're not going down rabbit holes. You're building personal power. And eventually these long-term disproportionate habits will just start to drop and fall away one by one. The thing is it's directly proportional to the accumulation of personal power. And I don't have a lot of other ways to talk about that other than it's a lot like, so I use the word power to insinuate, no, not imply, because it's directly correlated, but when I use the word power, it has to do with active attention. If you have an object and you give it your attention, it is now an object of power because you're giving it your attention and it's imbued with your attention. It's not some like mystical thing that I'm talking about. It's a direct translation. If I'm giving something my attention without all of the rabbit holes and, you know, I'm mindful, my mindful attention, I'm giving it power. And so that is an exchange, it's a connection. The human being, the conduit between these two things. We could call it positive and negative, earth and heaven, and the human being is in between. So when I say power and accumulation, what I really mean is just the smoothness of flow, the and I can use that word without ebb because it's the smoothness of the flow that we're looking for, which would imply the smoothness of the ebb as well because it's still vibrational. But does that make sense, Ida? So I guess I'm kind of foreshadowing and explaining how all of this will relate to your overall practice and experience.
The feeling of personal power is maybe like the deliberate choice feeling. You know, you have deliberately chosen to put your awareness, which is your power, onto whatever you kind of into that feeling of it's hard to describe that feeling of personal power
It
or
is.
and how it gets that accumulates to you and that gets to be preferred. You want to, well, I want to feel that way more often than not, you know,
Mm-hmm.
that feeling of, you know, that I have achieved things without willpower, without without force
Without
is,
force. Yeah.
yeah.
I would say willpower doesn't imply force, but a lot of the ways that people use that word, it does. But the willpower is, I think that's the reason we even use the word power is because it's like an expression of will. And we have often and easily the expression of intention, you know, but some people don't even focus on that because if it's super habitual, there's no direct intention behind it. Does that make sense? You lose intention the more the habit has accumulated momentum. But if you want to really highlight what the feeling of personal power feels like, let's say, I don't know, maybe say you want to learn how to ride a bike and you're using a lot of force and you go out there and you really try to force yourself into it and you fall over and you can't quite get it and you're really frustrated. Have you ever felt that? Maybe not with riding a bike, but
Yes,
anything.
then you just, in the past, then I would have just given up,
And you just
whatever that
given up. Yeah, that's the
person,
spirit's kind of breaks. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So, or you start leaking power about it. I can't do this. I'm not good enough, you know, and now what does that feel like? You know, that, like you said, there's a reason you give up when you start, when you have that energy, when you're going that direction with everything, you want to just quit. Now let's flip that around. Let's say that you weren't even trying to do something and, you know, maybe it is like riding a bike or a skateboard or something. Maybe somebody is in danger and you jump on that bicycle that you don't even know how to ride. And maybe you're a little wobbly at first, but then you get it and you ride and you do your thing and you save the person, and intention and will overlapped. The expectation and the desire overlapped. You had a lot of just do energy and then you do it. And then that feeling of I can I can do this even without the thought recognition. That has a totally different feeling. Have you ever had that type of feeling?
Yes, of course. And
Yeah,
that's
her walk was that.
Her
That's
walk
what
was
she
that.
just, that's what she
Exactly.
just described. I should
Yeah.
go, when did I go for a walk? How long was my walk? Evaluating the walk, whether I
Mhm.
should walk. She's already made all those decisions in her head about why walking is a desirable thing.
Yes.
And so because she's been practicing that, she notices sooner and sooner the things that clog the space between intention and just do, desire and just do. There were a lot of things in between those 2 points, thinking about it, evaluating it, judging it,
Mhm.
and even though it was a desirable thing and she got it accomplished, there's a lot of stuff that
Mhm.
she had to carry along with it, including analyzing it later at night on her, tracker or whatever, however she's maintaining it. And because she's been practicing and because she's been noticing how things have changed in her own behavior and in the behavior of others in her life, just by having a clear lens. She noticed sooner when the timer went off to go for the walk, when the other things that she had in place started to come in, they didn't feel good anymore. They didn't
Mhm.
feel like they were things that were bringing her to this goal or this desire that she had. They were actually getting in the way of it. So it's the same thing with riding the bike, except sometimes we look at, I want to be able to ride a bicycle. I want to be able to play a piano. I want to be able to play a guitar. Well, what are we defining playing the guitar? Picking it up and learning it and making the mistakes and getting sore fingers is playing the guitar. And if we can utilize our practice while we're doing something that we desire, then we stop measuring where we are in the process and we just recognize, I desire to do this, so I'm doing it. And I would venture to guess, based on my own experience, that the process of getting more proficient at the thing that you desire to do would be far quicker and more enjoyable than if we had all those other things, all the measurements in place. Oh, it's going to take me, if I can't even like make a note without it sounding buzzy, it's going to take me how many years before I can actually play a song and blah, blah, blah. Well, did you want to be a concert guitarist or did you just want to learn to play the guitar? If you want to learn to play the guitar, pick it up and learn to play the guitar. So it's I think if you're practicing, you recognize, if you're practicing, your lens is clear, and then you start to recognize the things that impede your practice, as opposed to the things that elongate the emphasis and contribute to the flow that go with. So I think it's all, for me, it's about recognizing it sooner. And I can't force myself to I don't want to really eat. I want to do intermittent fasting. I want to try it and see if it works. And then because I've made that decision and I'm practicing, I notice that I open the refrigerator and I go to grab something and put it in my mouth. Like, wait a minute. I wasn't practicing in that second, but I certainly have enough practice behind my belt so that my filter is clear enough that I noticed it before I ate the whole bowl of whatever was in there. So Ida noticed sooner. So the behavioral change happens as a result of the practice. We can have those desires to change certain behaviors, but then once we state them, once we make them clear, we kind of just write them down on a piece of paper or put them on a shelf, because focusing on the thing you want to change isn't going to change the thing. Focusing on the practice is going to make us notice what we're doing that's contributing toward that end, or getting in the way of, throwing resistance in the way of that end. But focusing on the goal isn't productive. Focusing on the practice is all you can do, because all you are is everything, the totality of your experience at this moment, in this moment. and that's all there is this moment. So
Right.
what you do with that is where the seed of behavioral change originates.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we can still focus on the goal, but it's with the practice, it's focusing on the step that's right in front of you that's a part of that goal. So if you're, in a life or death situation and the goal and the focus is survival, and you focus solely on survival and getting out of that, afterwards you can tell somebody, my focus, my crystal clear, unshakable focus was on survival. But it wasn't a cognitive exercise. It wasn't a thought exercise. It wasn't a talking to myself exercise. The focus was going through a clear lens, because in that, in those types of situations, sometimes we go into the practice that we're setting up because it's a matter of survival. Sometimes the body will go to optimal on its own, especially sometimes when our own survival is at stake. We'll go into an optimal condition in order to survive. Sometimes, some people will still, the dysfunctional mind will creep in and then they won't survive because they'll start thinking about things they can't do or whatever. So that's an example of where focus, again, that's a part of what we're doing as well. And I think what we're talking about, Ida, is kind of indicating where you are in the practice, how the practice is becoming preferred. That's the kind of that difference between the warrior training, precipice, and the hydrostacy.
The
Now,
feeling result of the
exactly.
practice is become preferred.
Exactly. And also just paying attention to how we feel, the feeling of everything, because we talked about a behavior. I don't even have to say these are the behaviors that are uninspiring, that I don't like, that I don't want. I don't make that list. I don't write any of that down. And I think that could be a tool for someone to help them not think about it, just like with creative ideas, write it down and go back to your practice. However, when you get into that hydrostacy plane, I don't know what else to call it. When we get into the hydrostacy practice, the practice is really pristine. It's more often than not, for sure, we feel which of these behaviors have habitual momentum. So you can feel that right away, that what you're about to do is the product of a long-term habit. And that's not a feeling that is preferred when you're really into the practice. When the practice has some good amount of momentum, you can feel easily what's taking you in and out of the direction of momentum. And so I don't have a list of behaviors that I don't find desirable. But when I start to do a behavior that I find undesirable, the reason it's undesirable now is because I can feel it. The reason I can feel it so well and so clear and so early, like Donna's pointing out, as it's occurring, is directly proportional to the pristine nature of my practice. How much am I doing my practice in this moment? That will be directly proportional to my ability to feel things without all of the traps of thinking. And then before you know it, once we've been doing this long enough and we've really been experiencing the hydrostatic part of the practice, your lens is clear. You're clearing karma. The karma going through attention, going through intention, going through the lens of perception. When that lens of perception is more clear and you're doing things that feel inspirational and that's starting to gain some momentum, everything around you starts to reflect that. Of course it would. The scarf is here because I put it here. The things around me are because I put them there. But now it's all with the power of intention, because I didn't do any of this mindlessly. Does that make sense? Oh, Ida dropped out. I was talking to Ida. Well, okay. I was done anyway.
Probably went to touch the unmute or something and touch the leave button by accident.
That's okay. One of the things about behavioral change that I've noticed is that we use the word lazy, and lazy, if you notice, is always something that you would rather be doing. So the reason that something doesn't get done when you're lazy is because there is always something else that you would rather be doing. I don't want to do the dishes because I would rather not. I would rather just sit here. I would rather just watch TV. Anytime the I would rather be doing and it doesn't have intention, it is because of the momentum of a habit. So the habit of watching TV, the habit of giving in to the biological destroyer and just eating, even though you know that this isn't the way that you should be interacting with your body and meals, just to put that in a very light and general sense. So, you know, people use the word intellectual lazy. You know, they would rather not think about this critically because they would rather go play a video game or go watch TV or go hang out with their friends or go do something that is what I call the first enemy of knowledge is distraction. And typically the distracted mind is choosing that out of habit. And that's where the laziness, well, what is laziness? Why is a person lazy? What makes something lazy? If you look at it empirically, watch the next time that you end up not doing something that you wanted to do, it's because you would rather do something else. Even if you feel it, it's like, I feel like I would rather watch TV. That's because TV had a lot of momentum of unconscious, below recognition, momentum and attachment. And so you would rather be doing that. I would rather just throw my trash on the ground because it would cost too much energy for me to put it in the trash can. Even if a person's not thinking that, their mind is making that evaluation. And that evaluation itself is also a part of habit. So when we look at what is the cause of laziness, habit, action and behavior that has fallen below the level of recognition. Does that make sense? And you guys can look at it. You can, I don't talk a lot about habit, and I wish Ida was still here because it's appropriate for our discussion, which means that we're really starting to get towards the end of this practice. The end of this practice really finishes up with behavioral change and things like habit and the momentum of laziness. And when all of that's gone, the practice really just finishes up with, I would recommend, and so I guess we'll just do it. I'll tell you, Donna, we'll wait for Ida to come back and I'll say it again. One of the final things I would recommend doing in this practice, you don't have to write it down, however you do it in your own creative way, but organize feelings, emotional memory, you know, whatever it is. There's certain feelings that are super hard for me to describe, but they're feelings that with the direction of my attention in the moment, I can oscillate to almost instantly. The vacation feeling is a pretty easy one that we're all familiar with because I've been talking about it for years. I can turn that on right now. I'll be at work, 7 hours into work standing, feet starting to hurt, people complaining, and I can turn on the vacation feeling. One of the ways a person can practice that is to organize those feelings. And now you have a toolbox, and it is emotion, it is vibration, it's whatever you want to call it. I really like emotional memory because you're putting yourself in a state of peace to remember other times when you were in states of peace and connection and, you know, awesomeness of the environment. And now you're back there. So here's another thing I noticed is that when this is occurring, and this is going to be, I mean, this is it. But so when all of this is occurring, when our practice is pristine, when we're able to deliberately modulate, which is the fourth pillar of the practice, choosing exactly how we want to feel, sensing into new things so that we can recall that later, which is sensing energy. And we're going with means that our lens of perception is clear. Our karma is clear. We're not doing things because we're attached to outcomes. We're doing things because we can, because intention and will yields results, and it yields action, and it yields creativity. When all of this is occurring and we're oscillating back and forth between the feelings that we desire, I mean, what else is there? The practice is complete. A person is able to choose exactly how they want to feel almost all of the time. That's it. I mean, that's this practice. That's from severe psychological suffering to being able to determine exactly how you want to feel. And then this is one of the final results of the practice, is that the final results. I don't know how to talk about this, but those aren't good words. It's not the final result, but maybe the final result would be a smooth transition to whatever is, you know, death, that having a smooth transition would be the final result of this practice. But you know, one of the things that occurs is our action in this practice just becomes because we can. Everything loses its heaviness. It feels like the burden is gone. And now I can play a video game because I want to fully use my imagination and enjoy it. And really, I'm not going to do it because it's just this mindless distraction and I want my mind to be distracted. So the gates of knowledge open up because the mind is no longer distracted. And we can start to learn more from our experience happening now, which equals that constant element of growth and change. But you're growing without trying to grow. You're changing without trying to change and manipulate and do all of those things, because at that stage of the practice, you're navigating your life experience with a clear lens of perception. And then you can see what habits are there. You can see when you're being lazy, which is, I would rather be doing a habit as opposed to doing something that doesn't feel habitual. You know, it doesn't have that unconscious momentum that the unconscious momentum desires and needs. It wants that. That's the nemesis. It needs it to exist. So once the nemesis starts to dissolve, because you're not feeding it, and so it gets tiny. It can't sustain itself unless you're giving your present moment unconscious attention below the level of recognition. And so when this practice, you know, and Ida, the way that you're, and I did go off a little bit on a tangent while you were gone, but ultimately you're getting to a point where your practice is becoming preferred through feeling. And the more that we engage that aspect of the practice, the more that you're in hydrostacy, and then redirect. Anytime you notice that you're going down those paths of traps of thinking from warrior training, are you thinking about yourself? Redirect. There's just no need to. I don't need to. I don't need to sit here and think about myself. I don't need to think about other people all the time, especially if they're not in the room with me. That makes no sense. And they didn't even ask me to think about them. They might not even want me to think about them. It might be energetically interfering with what they're doing. I don't know, but I don't want to do that, even if it's a possibility. So ultimately, yes.
But we didn't have to hold that, remember not to think about the self. That would have been like Ida using her tracker, overusing her tracker, whatever that means. You didn't have to remember not to do that. It's just you didn't feel well. It didn't feel good, and you went, wait a minute, why does this not feel good? And you maybe didn't even do that with words in your head, and then you went, oh, thinking about the self. And not that, oh, I shouldn't do it, that means I'm not practicing. It just was, that doesn't feel good, and back to the practice.
Exactly.
That doesn't feel good. I want to do what feels good, so I'm just going to go on my walk, and I'm just going to walk, and that's all of that is good enough because I'm practicing while I'm walking.
Because we're practicing. I want to do what feels good. It could easily be a self-hustle if you're not practicing, because what feels good when you're not practicing is habit, is momentum, is things that you've gotten used to, you know, like maybe eating too much, watching too much. When I say too much TV, out of balance. 8 hours a day, you are out of balance. You just spent hundreds and hundreds of minutes doing the same thing, and were you below or above recognition? If you say above recognition, then I got nothing to say. If you watch TV for 8 hours above recognition, you were doing your practice, and I can't interject a darn thing. You know, maybe answer some questions if any arise, but if you're above recognition and doing your practice, I have nothing to say unless you ask questions, because you're doing it. Or if you forget but you're still committed to remembering, then you're still doing it. I can help a person remember more often. But here's the end of this system, as I explain it. And everything else can just be everything else, different things. I want this to end here, is when the practice is preferred, we're finding that the ebb and flow can be more fluid. We're surfing, still counterbalance, we're still adapting, we're still adding habit. But once we see it, because we feel it, because it's becoming imbalanced, we see it sooner, we redirect sooner, we make adjustments sooner. So we're still surfing, but we're doing it. right? And the practice is based on feeling. We're not trying to control. We're not trying to manipulate. We're not comparing. We're not contrasting. All of a sudden, the present moment becomes enough. That's this practice. When the present moment, without all the bullshit that we've created, becomes enough, there's no such thing as lazy. There's no such thing as I need to, or I should, or I shouldn't, or I shouldn't have, all of a sudden, there's a moment in this practice with enough momentum that it all just seems to shift. There's like a change where the present moment becomes more vivid, and I don't need anything else but this present moment exactly the way that it is. So I'm at work. I'm in my 7th hour of work. I've been on my feet are hurting, and people are getting upset. They're getting rude. I'm making up a scenario. Some of it happens pretty often, such as the 7 hours on my feet. My feet start to hurt after 7 hours on my feet. That is when the mind would most habitually go to I would rather. When you go to I would rather, you start to project yourself outside of the present moment, imagining all the other things that you would habitually rather do than be in the present moment doing what you're doing, because you would rather. Now, in this practice, when the present moment is enough, there is no such thing as I would rather. You know, there are things that are maybe more fun than others, but that doesn't mean I would rather be doing them, because I'm present. There's no room for I would rather, because I would rather requires thought, it requires cognition, it requires attention, and it requires momentum. And it's not getting it because I'm present. Especially if I'm doing my 4 directions, I'm aware of my breath. I'm aware of the cognition itself. One of my favorites, and this is a hydrostacy technique, pay attention to the space, that feeling of space in the mind. Like, it's a feeling. You can feel, it's like, like that's what it's like to feel space. I can choose that. I can engage that. I can highlight that. And that becomes one of my 4 directions. My breath is present, and that is one of my 4 directions. If I'm at work, I'm paying attention to acupuncture points on my body, like K1, kidney 1, the bubbling well. That's the 3rd direction. And I'm actively engaging the environment around me. That's a 4th direction. When I have all 4 directions active, there's nothing but feeling, and the moment is enough. I find appreciation despite. So I'm on my feet for 7 hours. I love that feeling compared to not having a job, compared to searching for a job. So I can still find appreciation. There's always a feeling in deliberate modulation that you can find regardless of the situation that you're in. And all of a sudden, every single moment that you're in is enough. And that is one of the biggest differences between the common mind and a mind that has been doing this practice for a long time. Because if you're on vacation, vacation is enough. If you're at work, that moment being at work, it's enough. You're alive. You're creating. How are you interacting with being at work? You have to go do something that you don't really want to do, but you really care about how the other person feels. So you've made that decision. You've made that trade-off. When you go to do it, you find the beauty in it. You find ways to enjoy it, because this moment is always enough. In this practice, when the moment becomes enough, everything else will absolutely 100% change on its own. Everything, absolutely everything. And then you'll find, and it's just so interesting to see how many of your desires just fizzle away because they were a part of the destroyers. They were a part of the nemesis. It was going through a lens of perception that wasn't clear. And remember, a clear lens of perception is one that is practicing. The higher degree of practice, the more clear your lens of perception is. Clear of what? Clear of repetitive thinking, clear of thinking that doesn't make you feel well, thinking that is just reinforcing other thoughts that don't make you feel well and that are potentially setting others up to not feel well. All of that is gone.
Clear of resistance.
The what?
Clear of resistance.
I think that's yeah, we could word it that way. I know how we use that word, resistance.
Resistance is anything we put in the path of anything that we put in the path of the way of our natural flow. And it can feel it. And if you're practicing, you can feel it, and then naming it becomes less important.
Yeah.
Was I thinking about myself? Was this a biological principle that I, with it doesn't matter whether I can name it, or it doesn't matter. It doesn't even justify me spending the time to make the words to label it, because I'm not in that feeling, and I just did that myself. If you stopped me and said, Donna, what did you just think? What shift did you just make? I could stop and explain it in words, but I don't need to do that all of the time when I'm living my moments and I'm in my practice. I just notice the feeling is not desirable. I recognize that I'm leaning away from I feel the pull away from my practice, and then I go back to my practice. And that's really all I need to do.
That's all
I
you
can,
need to do.
and the space that creates in your brain is such a nice place to be. I'm not at all there today, but I can still describe it.
And eventually it can become a point of deliberate modulation, where it's a point that you can just really quickly, if not almost instantaneously, just sense yourself into. I'll explain one of mine. So Ida, have you ever, and I know you have, so this is a rhetorical, but we're looking at a painting, and this is a painting that is a masterpiece from an artist. All of their skill that they had learned through their entire life has been poured into this piece of art, and many ways we could define it as flawless. It is the expression of all of the skill that they have ever learned. And we're looking at this piece of art, and this artist is long dead. So they lived in the 1800s. I'm just making this all up. And to explain one feeling, I have to make all this shit up. So we have an artist, and we're looking at the painting in our time, and we're imagining, what was that artist thinking? Where were they when they were making that painting? Right? They're painting the river. What's that famous river, the Rhine in France, where it's like they call it the cradle of impressionism.
The Seine?
Yeah, I don't know. I've only seen it in writing, so I'm going to say it wrong anyway. But yeah, so
the Rhone, is it the Rhone?
the Rhone, yeah, that one. Yeah. So we're imagining to ourselves, what was it like when the artist was painting that painting? Like, were they doing it on a sunny day? Were they catching all the lighting? How did they feel? What did that artist feel like when they were in that smooth ebb and flow of creation? Well, was that artist aware of that feeling and how they felt? And were they aware that what they were creating someday in 1,000 years, people would potentially look at and wonder what they were thinking while they did it? I don't know, maybe not. I don't know how many artists,
No, I
forge.
don't think so.
Maybe
I think
not.
they're doing it just because they need to get it out of their system,
Sure.
or they feel that they've got a way of expressing it maybe that's different to well, of course it's going to be different, but if you're not copying it, it's going to be different, because it's the uniqueness of the artist that creates the painting. But yeah, I you can feel that when you're standing in front of a painting like that hopefully they've conveyed that feeling that they wanted to convey when they were creating it, or certainly after they created it. There's a feeling, I feel it sometimes with mine, that there's a feeling of like, well, you feel as if you had, when it's really good and you get that scurry almost. No, scurry's not right, but there's an excited, scurry feeling like, holy fuck, I did that. How did I do that? Pardon my French, but how did I do that? And you're just the conduit for it to express itself through you.
Yeah, there's some kind of collaboration that occurred, that it wasn't just from me to the paper. There was some kind of collaboration that occurred, because now it's speaking back to me, and I did it.
And so, you know, that artist is in that artist's edge when they're doing it. And the artist's edge in the rings of power is when you're in that invisible, you know, threshold between the second and the third, between the known and the unknown, and you're taking the unknown and making it known, and that's the process of creativity. And
Don't you
that's
find, Ernest, once it's made, it's the same with your books. I'm sure you would, well, I can't suppose that you'd have this feeling, but once it's made, it's like it's always been.
hmm.
I can look at a painting. I'm looking at it now, The Girl with the Blindfold, and it's like it was always there.
Hmm.
You know, that feeling is like, you know, that's just another one that came out that's there, but it feels like it was always there. There's
So
maybe that's the timeless feeling.
no. See now,
No,
so no, now here's the
no,
thing, Ida. Oh, this is good. So I was describing a feeling,
okay.
attempting to anyway. And the reason I was describing that feeling is because that's a feeling I can deliberately modulate to anytime I want to. It's the artist's edge. It's the I am creating works of art, but right now I'm walking to work. And maybe 1,000 years from now, they're going to be like, well, what was it like for Ernest to walk to work? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. But it's a kind of feeling that I enjoy as that timeless artist. Okay, and you were just describing a feeling. And that's not one I'm super familiar with, but it sounds interesting. I can follow you logically, right? You're giving the feeling of something always being there. Now, what you may have erred in is saying that's the feeling of dot, 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 implying that anybody else is ever going to feel it the way that you just described it. That's an erroneous implication. You know, we're unique. So, but that feeling that you just described can become your deliberate modulation. That feeling of when you look at something and it's like it's always been there, even though you just created it. Now, Donna and I, we might have to be like, okay, I don't quite know, or maybe we do, I don't know, but I'm over here like, okay, I kind of, but I'm not really sure. That's okay. I'm not really, you know, feeling exactly what you're feeling because we're two completely different people. And that's why at a certain point, I can't teach feeling. We can't talk about feeling in any absolute way because it's too unique. Principle of the hawk. So the feeling that you were feeling is 100% valid to you. And I love the way that you described it. But we can't pretend that that feeling is supposed to be valid for anybody else other than you.
And then the Tai Chi teachers and all try to make you feel that because they feel it, you
exactly.
know, and they're trying to
They're,
just make you have to feel this way, otherwise it's
bingo.
not authentic
They're
Tai Chi.
they're
You know?
selling a feeling. They're
Yeah.
selling their own experience, and that's something that a person cannot sell. That's snake oil. That's not real.
Well, I'm
So
trying to say to you this, Ernest. Well, this I shouldn't. Well, Gal, stop.
well,
What I was thinking was that feeling of the thing always being there. Like
yeah.
you must have ideas. That word's not right either. You probably have ideas for books that are in your head, and when you get them out and you get them on paper, you sort of feel a sense of accomplishment. Like that was inside my head, and now it's there and it's out and it's
Mhm.
in print. Um, to a certain extent, that's what I feel about certain paintings, and there's more inside my head that are, there's a rightness inside you, there's a knowing inside you. It's like inner guru saying to me, my inner guru saying to me, okay, you got that one out, right, on to the next one. And I imagine as a writer you would have that feeling of not how you expressed it, not how you expressed it in the moment that you were writing it, but just the feeling of rightness about getting it out
Sure.
of your head and onto paper.
And but I just want to make this point though. The point is whether I have felt that or not, you have. And you can use that feeling as a form of deliberate modulation. I'm explaining deliberate modulation and how it works. So, you know, maybe I can relate and I can start to conjure up, you know, that feeling that you're describing. It's probably going to be a little bit different because we're different human beings, but ultimately you can use that as a form of deliberate modulation. Does that make sense, Ida? That's
Yes,
really
that's a
where I'm
good
going with
idea.
all of it.
I
Yeah.
would never have thought about it like that, but yes, I'm looking. at a background that I've done for a painting, and I get excited about it because I know it's going to become something.
Mm-hmm. That
It's in the
feeling.
becoming. It's the
Yes.
becoming stage.
The
You know what I
becoming
mean?
stage can be, it doesn't matter if I know what you mean. That's another point I'm making. Doesn't matter at
That's
all if I know what you mean.
that's a Northern Irelandism.
Well,
You know what
okay.
I mean?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Sorry
Uh,
about that. That's a
no, it's
habit.
okay. No, it's okay. So whether I know what you mean or not, whether I have felt exactly what you have, and you can use that as a form of deliberate modulation. You can choose to go to 1970s burnt amber as opposed to me going to 1970s brown, you know. Burnt amber
So,
is maybe a type of
so
brown.
Ida's deliberate modulation can be the feeling of the becoming of
The
something.
becoming of
The
something.
becoming of
Absolutely.
something.
Oh, I
She
love
can
that.
she can
Absolutely.
capture that and recreate it.
Yes.
And it exists. And I think it's just how she put her words together. But I think that the commonality that anybody can say that they've felt something similar, parallel, because it's always subject to our own lens of perception and our own interpretation of a feeling, is energy can't be created or destroyed. It always exists. It just takes on a different form. So your doing, your writing, Ida's painting, whatever it is, it could be somebody's mothering, it could be their cooking, it could be their anything, is their creation. It's the way they put the points of the line together, the pieces of energy together, and create something new out of it. They didn't create new energy. The energy is there, which might account for the feeling that it's always been there after they've made it, because they've really just reconfigured energy that already exists and put it out. And it's your personal, unique, never to be copied or repeated thing. And also the feeling that went along with it. We can imagine what the artist was feeling when they painted it. We could, but it will always be through the lens of our perception. It's even this conversation is through the
Everything.
lens of our perception. What I
Everything is,
came
yeah.
to understand, what I come to understand after this class, I may know Ida better, or I may know you better, or I may understand the practice better. And or I may not, like, it doesn't matter. It just matters that I have organized it in a way in my mind that brings me closer to peace or further from peace.
Mhm.
And a connection. I mean, I think that's part of a human experience, is that feeling of connection. So the fact that we're having this discussion is an example of that. So Ida's becoming, and I have my own understanding of it. I love the way she just described it. It's like when I read a poet, I love what they just described. I'll never know whether I'm getting the exact point that poet was trying to make, because it's always through the lens of my perception. But it spoke to me.
Sure.
It spoke to me, and it's something that gave me a feeling that I can recreate and deliberately modulate to whenever I want. The more intimate and detailed I can feel about that feeling, the easier it is for me to recreate and to deliberately modulate to in another circumstance.
And it's
so,
always worth it. I always feel that it's always worth the effort. It's like some people say to me, why do you bother setting the table in a certain way, putting candles on it, like getting a certain ambiance? Because I think it's always worth the feeling that it creates.
mhm.
It's the same with the painting, the same with the cooking. It's like an alchemy. And when you go that extra mile, it shows. It's probably the quality aspect.
Yes, it's
It's
your
the-
interpretation of the
Yeah,
becoming. I want this meal to be an event, and along with
yeah,
the meal, there is the beauty of it appearance, and there is the whatever of the smell, or whatever things you populate your data of a moment, of an experience in your way. And so the preparation of it is part of the becoming, and you enjoy that process. So it doesn't matter whether you've gone the extra mile or not being worth it. For you, it's worth it. For you, you can be in the moment and enjoy those data points of populating the data of creating a meal. It's like creating a painting. But the data points of measuring and monitoring whether your walk was sufficient or not, that became something that was static, that got in the way of you enjoying your walk. You get to, it's a personal determinant. I can't tell you what your balance is. Ernest can't tell you what your balance is. You can only decide what your balance is. Some people might love to analyze all the details of the walk after it was done, and it doesn't take away from their walk at all. If it does that for you, then only you can decide what's moving you toward peace or not. Only you can evaluate the virtues of the practice. Only you can decide whether you are above consciousness or below consciousness when you made those decisions. It's just the principle is the same for everybody.
Yes, I totally get that. And I think the mathematical part of it, it's not my thing. The mathematical part of it takes away the magic, and other people would say that the mathematical part of it is their magic. But by analyzing it too much, it takes away the magic of the present moment, wind in your face feeling, if you understand.
I do, yeah. And you snuck in the quality recipe of Zen and motorcycle maintenance, because the quality comes from caring about something and giving it your attention and intention, and then that creates quality. So yeah, that could be where the quality.
Sure, it doesn't mean you have to buy a motorcycle and learn how to fix it, and there you will find peace. That's not
right.
the point.
No, yeah, I think he made that point in the book too. It has the art is in how we do something, not necessarily what we're doing. So you can. But I would argue that the artist is somebody that's committed to the art. That's what makes them an artist, as opposed to just somebody, because we're all creating, and how we do it can be an art, but an artist is somebody who, that's their thing. That's really what they focus on is
Right, and that's why
that, yeah.
going the extra mile to setting the table, when people say, why would you bother? It doesn't have that same quality to them.
Right. And then that we have actually, Ida, in the process of this discussion, concluded the practice. So we go from an introduction to mindfulness, and very likely forgetting all the time, to counterbalance, where we start working with the rule of three. We start really noticing the nature of our thought and how it's repetitive, habitual, and almost always taking us out of the moment that we're in. And then we go into warrior training, because we're really convinced in this. And like Donna said, we really want to be committed to embodiment, even if we're not embodying all the time. And then we start to remember more than we forget. And then we really start to get into the feeling of the practice, because the thoughts have finally started to relax. And that's when we get into the hydrostacy section. So some of the feeling that we've been talking about, like, we don't have to try to communicate it to one another, although, we're doing that for the sake of discussion to a certain extent. Ultimately, what we've been really talking about, though, is how when you have created space in your mind, you now have the opportunity to choose how you want to feel, which is the basic of law of attraction, by the way. Everything that law of attraction, I know that people cherry pick what they want to take away from things, but ultimately the feeling has to be there. Esther Hicks, the feeling has to be there. They will tell you that. It's there with hydrostacy. With hydrostacy, the feeling of I can, the feeling of the things that you want to do. So you're literally doing everything that Esther Hicks has talked about in the law of attraction, but you're doing it. And the thought can be a tool towards doing it. And that's also consistent with their teaching. So ultimately, it's the seat of law of attraction. It's the seat of creation. It's the seat of conscious creation. And then that's it. This practice ends with a person being able to choose how they want to feel, continue to explore and find new ways to feel things, and then to be in alignment with the world around them, which is non-resistance, not trying to control, and ultimately is a huge source of freedom, going with things rather than against, redirecting when something doesn't serve you or benefit you because it's got momentum. You can now redirect it. You're not trying to redirect something that hasn't even occurred. That would be like trying to get a habit out of yourself that you don't even have yet. That doesn't make sense.
Yeah, but life without imagined fear is what I'm feeling now. Is I'm not saying I wouldn't say, well, I was going to say I'm not saying that I've conquered fear, because
Right.
you know, you need to be afraid of certain things
Balance is the principle.
to stay
Yeah.
alive. Yeah, but
Yeah.
a life without that imagined fear, you know,
Right.
the 3 o'clock
Psychological
in the
fear.
morning, yeah, the psychological fear
Yeah.
is a life worth living.
Fear is one of the
In my
enemies of
opinion.
knowledge. You're going to love the book where I go through the enemies of knowledge, Ida, because one of the first enemies of knowledge is distraction. You can't really learn as the moment is occurring if your mind is somewhere else. The best you can do is learn months later, years later, somebody reminds you of something, therapy. But what we ultimately want to do is be able to learn as things are occurring, because that's the memory process. We can process it better to memory, which means that we can recall it from memory better if we're more active when the lessons, when things are occurring. So that's one of the enemies of knowledge is distraction. We've talked about that today. What's the one we just talked about? You just described it. One of the enemy. Oh, fear. Fear itself is one of the. It's actually one of the last enemies, I would say as well, because after fear, then I mean,
I tried to imagine um, a, a life without fear,
psychological fear. Yeah.
psychological fear of
Hmm.
the future unknown, you know, things that occur in my life, you know, uh,
Yeah.
and, you know, I've actually felt a feeling behind that of peace,
Of
behind that
course.
fear.
Yeah.
So that's, it's nice to feel the possibility of that
It's
in all circumstances of your life, you know,
right.
to know, you know, the feeling of knowing that you're going to be okay, no matter what circumstances arise in your life. It's how you react to them. And doing this practice has uh, is teaching me to consider all those other possibilities that maybe don't involve
Hmm.
fear.
Right. And then when there's, to a certain extent, the mind is fearing the unknown because that's what it's hardwired to do. It's hardwired to keep you safe. The unknown is something that there's no safety guaranteed in the unknown, right? So your brain naturally doesn't prefer that. And that's our surfing. We surf that for the rest of our lives. That's a part of the human condition, the human dynamic. The key is to not let those things get momentum by focusing on them, and then they become disproportionate fears that are, totally disproportionate to the experience that you're in. And it can actually lead to creating what you fear because your attention is on it. And would you have really broken it had I not said anything type of thing. So but but ultimately, Ida, I love where you're going with all of that, because that is the end of this practice. You're choosing how you want to feel. The fear of these things can't exist without the psychology. So you're not giving that psychology energy, you're giving the present moment energy. And if there's a tiger in the room, there'll be appropriate fear so you can GTFO. Or maybe you sense that the tiger's not hungry and you play with it for a little while. It's, your thing. But that is this practice. That is the bridge practice. And I think that we have officially come, in discussion wise, we've come to the conclusion. When a person, and you just described this, Ida, when a person is in the moment that they're in and it's always enough, things may not be going your way, but you're alive. And if you can catch that feeling of I'm alive as a baseline, you're using death as your advisor. And if you're using death as your advisor, it will always inspire you to live. So when you're doing this practice and you're choosing between these feelings that you prefer, feelings that help you navigate, even if it's not a feeling you prefer, it doesn't have to be a feeling you prefer, but typically that's what we're going to choose because of the whole desire dynamic. But yeah. All right, that's it. And I would
That's it
say,
then.
yes.
That's it
What'd you say?
then.
That's it then.
No, you
Yeah.
said all right. That's it. And I'm
Yeah,
saying, well,
that's
that's
it.
it.
I have nothing left to share. If a person can, I'm going to say like me, because I do this. Pretty much every moment that I'm in, I can find it's enough. This moment is enough. Why is it not? I'm alive. I wouldn't want to look back on my life and say I spent 60% of it worrying about things that never mattered. never really
or wanting things. That's a great release for me.
attachment to desire.
Is
Yeah.
it knows the wanting things that in the in the common mind that we are expected to want, like vacations,
Sure.
cars, homes.
Yeah.
The absence of not wanting those creates space too.
It
That
does. Yes.
in the past took up a lot of my thought process was wanting things, and that, you know,
Yeah.
probably wanting experiences when really what you're describing and what I have felt, the delicious moment that we've got right now, uh, is just so exciting when
Mhm.
when it's enough, when it's enough. The feeling of that is just, it sort of sends all of those wants. And you know, uh, two of my sisters are away at the minute. One's in Spain, one's in Portugal. You know, they have family in New Zealand, and they're always traveling. And in the past, I would have felt like the poor relation because I wasn't doing all those things. But now I feel the richness of my life where I am right now is well and truly abundant with everything that I need. So I don't need to do that. And I'm not saying
You
that
don't.
I'll never do that, but I don't need to. I don't
Mm-mm.
have that want anymore. And the absence of that just makes your everyday experience extraordinary.
It makes it lighter, right? You feel less encumbered by these heavy burdens of I need to be doing something, or I should be traveling, or I wish I was elsewhere. It's always elsewhere. That's an interesting thing when the mind is doing that. But you're right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
when I'm talking to my sisters on WhatsApp or something, one in Portugal, well, how's it going? It's not great today. It's raining today. And I'm thinking, there you are in Portugal
Love
and
the
it's
rain.
raining. And, you know, so do I. But, you know, it's like the weather's not that great, or they might be saying certain things, still enjoying it. But, you know, what I'm trying to say is that their moment over there and my moment over here, my moment is worthy too,
Yes.
you know.
I like
An
her.
an
Yeah. It's a good way to
unencumbered
put it.
mind. You know, I'm not going to go into detail because we're at the end of class and we don't really need it. I got a call from the doctor with a lab report that wasn't great. And I just, it really was like space junk falling for me because I've spent so much time in my practice. And also, I had this underlying goal in the back of my head not to be my mother physically, and go through all the physical challenges that she went through, and is hereditary in my family. And I've learned to let go of diagnoses and hold on to them as a label that I attach to myself, and then live out that whatever that diagnosis is. And I have, because of that, I have not traveled a path that people with those labeled diagnoses have, just because I refused to do it. And so when I got this call from the doctor, I was it really pulled the rug out from under me, or I felt that. I felt it was real space junk that fell on me because, and then I went, I mean, it was amazing because I otherwise am practicing and feel wonderful. And that must have been a belief system that I held, that was a big chunk of resistance still in me, because the fact that it could really disrupt my whole practice, that I'd give the power, that much power away, leak that much power to that phone call, was really angered me more than the results that they told me on the phone. But I went down that rabbit hole and I woke up with it, grabbed it as soon as I opened my eyes this morning. And so I've been working my way through it during class, and class has been very helpful. But while you were just summing up everything, I know what I have to do. I have to just, you know, focus my attention and maintain emphasis, and then all that stuff just falls away. And it is a beautiful feeling when that happens. And as soon as you were summing up class, and Ida was talking about her life, and she was talking about her sisters in Portugal, and how you can always think everybody's grass is greener because it's the lens, your lens is dirty. That's the only way I want to describe it right now. And I'm looking out my window, and there are some gorgeous trees because they're all in different fall colors. And one of them in the condo complex across the way is a bright red orange tree. And there must be a breeze blowing there that isn't blowing here, a current of wind. And the tree just started letting go of every leaf. It was like it started snowing, like it consciously just decided. It was as if I just decided to let all my hair out of my head. And I'm watching it while you're speaking. And it, to me, really, I felt myself let go of all of that. Man, I picked up all the points of attention in that rabbit hole, and all at once, really quickly, like the second I stopped practicing, got that phone call. It is amazing how bad I felt so quickly. My shoulders up in my ears, and like, it's amazing how much tension, how much I held all of that, how much power I leaked to that one phone call and those words. And as I'm letting go of that and picking up my practice again and watching those leaves just give way out of I know that's exactly what happens. That's what happens inside of me. That's all of my thoughts about everything falling away. And actually, sometimes deviating from the practice and returning back to it is it's sort of like that becoming feeling that Ida was talking about, that it's like, I know that this is like where there's no choice when this is what I know I can create. I can let go of all of that, all of those leaves that I don't need. I don't need to hold on to any of that. And when I practice, all of that falls away all on its own.
Right.
So yeah, that's a feeling. I could never use any more words than this to describe what that feels like. But I watched the I don't know, an example of what I chose to interpret as that as I was feeling it. So
we could talk about it another time, but the
Sure.
more you can clear your mind when those feelings are occurring, it's the process of imprinting to memory. So it's just like processing anything else. It's contextual, and it's the best way to remember it is in how you process it. How you process information is sometimes proportional to how you recall it. So there are ways to process certain feelings so that you can recall them later, and I call that process imprinting the emotion to emotional memory.
And there's a negative way to do that and a positive. Well, I don't hate to say negative and positive.
Beneficial and
There's
unbeneficial.
an efficient, an efficient and inefficient way of doing that. Obviously, I imprinted a lot of things about that information because I had so much feeling occur as a result, and then just redirecting that into what I have newly imprinted as a preferred way of being changes a lot.
And even better, even rather than preferred, because preferred can get sticky, is just one's above recognition and one's below. So if you're imprinting below recognition, that's actually just habit. Here you're accumulating habit. That's the same word. If it's above recognition, that's why I use a different word, is you're remembering, you're choosing, well, you're not remembering, you're choosing to process a memory in a certain way that will help you recall it later. Yeah. Whereas when the mind is below recognition, you are below recognition accumulating things and patterns, and they will, when you are below recognition, it will recall itself later. It's doing it automatically without your permission below the level of recognition. And it will still occur to some extent. It's just what we're looking for. And I'm actually going to stop using the word flow by itself, and rather, in order for it to resonate with me, I have to say a smooth ebb and flow is what we're looking for. We're looking for continuity. We're looking for smoothness. This idea of flow, I think, has become another another thing to try to capture somebody's mind to insinuate that, you know, it's the preferred optimal human. No, it's what we're talking about is a smooth transition of ebb and flow, because we can't sit here and say that we become this straight line of flow. So what we're looking for is that laminear. We're looking for the smoothness of our flow to be to where it's almost looking like a straight line, even though we know it's not. Right. Or a spiraling line, I guess, if we want it to be. But yeah, so that's that. Imprinting is a technique to help a person when your practice is accumulate. I mean, because you have to be able to really pay attention to all the elements. You know, Donna was just describing all of the elements. You have to be able to pay attention to those elements with a quiet mind to process it into your memory so that you can recall it efficiently later. And before you know it, you have in the past, we have a toolbox of points of attention, and that toolbox lends to different practices such as fox walking, the rings of power, the 4 directions of attention. And eventually in hydrostacy, you're doing the same thing, but now you have a toolbox of emotional memory, of things that you can recall. So I'm at work, I'm in my 7th hour, and all of a sudden I decide to feel that feeling of employment. You know what it's like to, I'm glad I'm employed, right? That I can appreciate that. So that feeling of appreciation is something that's in my toolbox that I can easily modulate to when I see myself going back towards habit or poor me, or why isn't everything working out for Ernest? Everything isn't going how I want it to. That's just a habit of poor me, of focusing on yourself and self-importance. And if I'm doing my warrior training, which hopefully I'm always doing that, I will redirect that the moment I see that the focus is unnecessarily on self, and go back to the feeling, which is not necessarily just your thoughts and your likes and your dislikes. We're talking about something else. The lens of perception. All right, well, that's all I got. I will see you guys again on Tuesday, or actually Sunday if you can make it. Sunday at 11 a.m. I'm going to talk Shayna through what would be a mind or a Shen Tai Chi session. So in giving her the session, talking her through it, you can do it too, and then it will be beneficial for you as well. All right, well, I will see you guys then. If you have any questions or anything, just let me know. Ida, I don't want it to sound weird, but I would say congratulations, because based on the information, and again, this isn't saying anybody's perfect. You haven't leveled up. You know, we're not gonna have a ceremony or anything weird, but it sounds like the practice is becoming preferred, and that is what we call that event horizon. When the practice becomes preferred, you'll still forget, but remembering becomes preferred. And then eventually you can start to build your toolbox of feelings that you want to modulate to. And then when you're doing those other 3 techniques, choosing how you want to feel, finding new feelings and processing them to memory, you will find yourself in active alignment to the world around you. And when you're in active alignment, then you're in, as Donna said, in a state of resistance. And that's called merging with the Tao. You're welcome.
I'm happy for the congratulations. Does that mean I have to go and open wine?
You can if you want to. Yeah.
No, that's a habit. But
Is
that's
it?
dissolving too. That is, yeah, it's a weekend. It was a weekend thing, and now I'm finding, you know, it's occasionally now. It's not.
Yeah.
As
Remember that habit is always going to be something that we introduce to our experience, and habit, when it starts to get out of balance, we'll be able to feel it. You know, so if your wine every weekend, if that habit feels like it's still in your hydrostacy bubble, you don't have to declare war on that.
No, it's lovely, and I do love it so much.
But if all of a sudden you're doing that wine on the weekend and you're like, this is just starting to feel, I don't know, it's losing its I don't know-ness, you know, that could mean it's starting to fall out of your alignment. If your lens of perception is clear, you're going to be more accurate in your determining what is and isn't in your alignment. If your lens of perception is full of, I want a Ferrari, I want these people to like me, I want these people to listen to me, me, I, then the vast majority of your desires, and therefore your karma, the momentum of your experience, is going to be residual with all of that. And it's not very trustworthy, those feelings. You're feeling them, so they're valid, but they're not good guide. It is a guidepost, but yeah, to show you that you're not in practice.
The ebb to
It is the ebb.
the
Yeah,
ebb to yeah,
sure.
the ebb to lean you back toward flow. It's
The
just noticing it. The sooner you notice it, the sooner you notice it,
the sooner you notice
the
it.
smoother it gets.
I walked outside the other day and it was raining and it was dark and it was cold and I immediately stepped in a puddle. So that was the ebb, right? That was a challenge. And I immediately was able to redirect it. I got home, I was only a little bit grumpy. I could have been a whole lot more grumpier had I focused on everything that wasn't, preferable. But then I remembered that I'm walking home in a city I've chosen to live in, and I love the rain and I love the sound, and it's not that cold, and my foot's not that wet. Like, I'm going to be okay. When I get home, I'll switch my socks and it will all be a part of the experience, and I don't have to declare war on it. And I can choose the feeling of timelessness as I walk at night because I don't normally walk at night. See how easy I redirected that? And when I got home, I was only a little bit grumpy, as opposed to don't fucking talk to me for the rest of the night because my foot's soggy. Yeah. Okay. I will see you guys again on Sunday or Tuesday if you can make it.
Thank you
Right.
very much. That
You're
was really
welcome.
good. Enjoyed-
Yep. See you
enjoyed
guys, and I'll record, or I'll put the recording. This is
Donna.
a general
Mm.
one to YouTube.
Everybody
All right.
else.
See you guys.
Bye. Thank you.
See you, Mike. Have a good one.